Welcome everybody, both those in the room and those who are joining us online. For those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Tracy Vaughn and I'm the Executive Director with Community Development Council Durham. We're a local social planning council and independent organization that works in the community to advance the issues of social justice and inclusion. We've been operating in Durham Region for 40 years on those issues and we're proud to be a partner here today. We're deeply committed to working in partnership with Campaign 2000, Make Poverty History, Voices from the Street, 25 and 5, The Color of Poverty, Color of Change, and many other key community partners are working towards a poverty-free Ontario. Our forum today may be located in Ajax, in Durham Region and in Ontario, but this is certainly larger than those of us that are in the room today. We are fortunate to be transmitting coast to coast. We have 7 provinces and 1 territory joining us here today. All of us share a collective desire to see that the federal government does its part to make poverty history in Canada. The government must push to create the right framework, the right levers, for the necessary systemic change to occur to address poverty in a meaningful and a sustainable way. Today we will hear from the representatives of each federal party on how their party plans to ensure that the necessary systems and resources are in place to ensure that everyone has equal opportunity to succeed. I would like to thank the 4 representatives from the federal parties who have joined us today. Starting from the right, Mark Holland, MP, Liberal, Ajax Pickering. Chris Alexander, the Conservative Party candidate for Ajax and Pickering. Trish McAuliffe, NDP candidate for Whitby and Oshawa. And Rebecca Harrison, Green Party candidate for Whitby and Oshawa. Thank you so much for sharing your positions with us today. I also wanted to acknowledge those local councillors who have joined us. And I understand that Neil Joe from Clarington has joined us today. Thank you. And we also did get an RSVP from John Henry, Mayor of Oshawa. I'm not sure, I haven't seen Mayor Henry. And also for Renrick Ashby and Joanne Dyes from the town of Ajax. So thank you to all of those individuals for demonstrating their commitment to poverty reduction. Thank you also, we would be remiss if we did not mention the town of Ajax as our hosts today and also for providing the necessary logistical support. And as well, to bring in our colleagues and partners and friends from across the nation, thank you so much to the Lead Well Foundation for making the online conference occur. So, without further ado, we will hear from the representatives of each federal party. They will then respond to questions. People online and those here in the room have the opportunity to submit questions in writing and indicate to whom the question should be posed. There is a question form on the seat that you hopefully aren't sitting on. If you are, please remove the seat, the form from under your on your seat, and use that form to submit your question. After the question period, we will then have a brief opportunity to talk about how we move this forward in Durham Region. I look forward to that, and thank you so much.
Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Howlett. I'm the National Coordinator of Make Poverty History. Our office is in Ottawa, but we have hundreds of thousands of supporters across the country, and we're all about engagement. How you can become involved in helping to make poverty history, both globally and here in Canada. And I want to just highlight a few of the actions that we are carrying out right now and how you can get involved. Right now we have a petition, and you will find copies of this on the information table outside in the lobby. And this is a petition in support of Bill C-545, which is a private member's bill that was introduced by NDP MP Tony Martin, supported by Liberal MP Mike Savage and Bloc MP Yves Lassard. So it's got multi-party support. And it's an act that would require the government to bring forward a poverty reduction plan. And it's got some really good ideas in it. We were involved in helping to write this. And even though the chances of this bill actually getting passed, especially if there's an election, are slim, we do want to use this as a model for any future government to encourage them to bring in such a bill, or if after there is an election, it can be reintroduced. So this petition is one, it's an old-fashioned petition. You sign it on paper and ask your member of parliament, and in this case, it may be, if you're right in this area, it would be Mark, and I'm sure he would be happy to submit it to the House of Commons. There's a time every day on the agenda when they can do that. The other thing I wanted to draw to your attention also on the information table is the Dignity for All campaign. It's jointly coordinated by Citizens for Public Justice, Canada Without Poverty, and Make Poverty History, and we are campaigning for a poverty reduction act and for a poverty reduction plan federally. Many provinces now have plans, but they can't achieve poverty reduction targets without the federal government also playing its role. So sign up to this campaign at Dignity for All. And finally, I know that today is sort of a dress rehearsal for an election, and we're getting ready for an election as well at Make Poverty History, and we have a Vote to Make Poverty History campaign ready to roll out. If the grid gets dropped next week, this will be rolling out. And we've got all kinds of tools and ways in which people can get involved in making sure that the poverty issue gets discussed during the election. This is an example of what we're trying to do, and we'll do more of this kind of thing right across the country to make sure poverty doesn't get lost in the election. And the way you can find out more about this is to go to makepovertyhistory.ca. Don't forget the .ca, because there are other Make Poverty History campaigns in Australia, the UK, and elsewhere. Find the Canadian one, and you will be able to download all kinds of tools and things that you can do during the election to make poverty history. Thank you.
And I'm Laurel Rothman, National Coordinator of Campaign 2000. We're an umbrella of groups, everybody from food banks, social planning councils, unions, faith communities, healthcare, housing, and childcare providers, low-income people, among others. And I just want to say a couple words. It's a critical time for poverty reduction and eradication in this country. It's hard to believe that after a decade of record economic growth in this country, 3 million people live in poverty. And that was, because of the way statistics go, even before the recession in 2008. Those are our most recent numbers. And that includes about 1 in 10 children. And certainly for Aboriginal people, sole support mothers, recent immigrants, racialized groups, and people with disabilities, the risk is greater. So maybe what I want to say is, however, we've had serious study and attention to poverty in the last couple of years. You may know an important report from the Senate, and recently a very important report from the All-Party Committee, a parliamentary committee in the House, working in partnership toward reducing poverty. It actually specifically recommended a poverty reduction plan and a dedicated poverty reduction fund for the provinces, to work with the provinces on this. So maybe my last words are, you know, we do have the answers. We can reduce and eventually eradicate poverty. We have the policies and programs, and now we need the implementation and the action. So together we're going to hear from our representatives of our political parties on how they will address poverty. It remains our job as community members to hold all of our representatives accountable. Thank you. And let me briefly introduce the next speaker, and then Carol Gore will join us as moderator. I want to welcome Mike Creek from Voices from the Street. Mike is someone who brings the essential perspective of having lived experience with poverty, whether currently or in the past. The group of Voices from the Street helps to connect those key experiences, work with people who want to convey their stories, ideas, and solutions to government decision makers and the public. So, Mike.
Good Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here in Ajax today. And I'm also here with one of the members from Voices from the Street. My friend Kelly is here today with me. And we both have experienced what it's like to live in poverty and what it's like to be homeless. And I can tell you today more than ever, we need a federal government to take action on poverty. There has to be more to governing a country than just tax cuts. Recently, I was asked about the government response to the Senate report, In From the Margins, a call to action on poverty, housing, and homelessness. This is a very good report that was totally ignored by those in power. The report and the recommendations was a guide, a compass, to move our country forward. How can you ignore something that impacts every Canadian? It appears that our Prime Minister cares more about million-dollar hockey players with concussions than he does about the 3.4 million Canadians in poverty. Yes, our national sport is hockey, and our national shame is poverty. You don't have to look very far to see poverty. It's everywhere in our country. On our First Nations, people suffer from inaction. Recent immigrants, seniors, women with children, and those with a disability all need the government to take action. Try being single on welfare in Ontario and surviving on $592 a month. This is our shame. Each of us needs to demand change. Has the government lost touch with the 4 million Canadians who are struggling to find decent, affordable housing? When people have affordable housing, they can rebuild their lives, they can move on, they can move forward, they can become really, really great Canadians, but we deny them that chance. It makes me cringe when I see people who are forced to sleep on our streets. We need a government that understands the value of having an adequately funded national housing strategy. This has been said over and over and over now for years, but the government continues to ignore the problem. The widening gap. We have the have-nots and the haves in this country. It's a last 2 years, food bank use has increased by 28%. That has to tell you there's something terrible is happening out there and our government fails to move on it. Canada, our country, cannot afford to elect another government that fails to recognize that as a nation we can no longer afford not to address poverty. It makes no economic sense to ignore this problem. I urge all political parties to take on the challenge of building a stronger, a more prosperous Canada. A country where each of us can be proud to live in and each of us have the same place to live. This country, we need a place to start. And it's by working together that we can end poverty.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Carol Gore needs not much introduction. She's columnist with the Toronto Star and brings 30 years or plus of journalism, and she's going to moderate the panel. Thank you, Carol.
Very much, Laurel, and can everybody hear me okay? Because you're going to be listening to me for the next 90 minutes or so. Okay. Louder.
Is it on? On the bottom.
Stand for it.
It's wireless. Yeah, it's on. Is it on?
How are we doing now? That better? Okay. It's a privilege for me to be here among people who want to talk about poverty. It doesn't happen nearly enough, especially in election campaigns. Let me begin by thanking our hosts in Ajax, our electronic hosts at the Leadwell Foundation, and all of you for being here and participating online. Here's what's going to happen over the next 90 minutes or so. I'll begin by introducing our 4 political panelists and asking each of them a single question. what will your party do to make poverty history? They'll each have 3 minutes to answer. Our timekeeper, Megan, sitting right in front of me, will raise a yellow card when they reach the 2-minute mark and a red card when a panelist's time is up. For those of you who are participating online and can't see the cards, she'll also ring a bell. Then we move into the question and answer session. I will give you a few moments to write your questions, although I notice some people have already been doing it. As our organizers gather them and bring them to the front of the room, I will kick things off with one question for each of the candidates. Please keep your questions short. Tell us your name, where you're from, and who you would like your question directed to, and I will read them out loud. The reason we're doing this is because we want to give everybody, including our online participants, a fair chance to ask questions. So I think that should be enough to get us going, and I'll ask Mark Holland to speak first. He has represented, just a moment, gotta do the introduction here. He has represented Ajax Pickering in Parliament for the last 7 years. As many of you know, he began his career as a financial advisor and served as a municipal councillor in Pickering and a regional councillor in Durham before entering federal politics. He is now the opposition critic for public safety. Can you tell us what the Liberal Party will do to make poverty history?
There, I hear the buzzing of the clock already starting. Let me first of all thank the Community Development Council of Durham, Tracy Vaughn, and everybody involved for putting this together along with Campaign 2000. I used to be vice chair, actually, when it was under a different name, and deeply appreciate all the work that you do in the community. Unfortunately, while we may be coming out of the recession at the highest level, that the reality for so many Canadians is they haven't left it at all. In fact, poverty has never been a bigger concern across the country. Use in food banks has just been referenced, is up 28%. Even from 2005 to before the recession really began, we saw food bank use up 10%. We know that while we made some strides, not enough, I'll be the first to concede it, between 1996 and 2005, seeing the rate of poverty dropping between 16% to 11%, lifting 1 million people out of poverty during that period of time, we've seen fundamentally a reversal over the last number of years. And I think we fundamentally have to ask the question, where does poverty come from? Who is poor and why are they poor? And what can we do to change it? First, we have to recognize that disproportionately women, Aboriginal people, the disabled, as well as the elderly are overrepresented when we deal with poverty. And let's very quickly look at each of those issues. When it comes to women, so many of them face an enormous challenge. If they want to get more education, they can't afford the child care to do it. If they want to go out and get a better job or to find extra time to work, child care becomes an enormous impediment. We need to have a national early childhood learning strategy to make sure women in that situation can get the education they need or get the jobs that they need to be able to support their families. When we're dealing with the disabled or the elderly, we need to make sure the benefits are such that they're providing them a decent rate of living, that they have a standard of living that's appropriate to the conditions they're in. We have a federal budget coming up. We have important choices to be made. We need to see dollars put there to help seniors and to help the elderly. We need, with respect to our Aboriginal community, we need to go back to Kelowna. We need to look at making sure that we have a national strategy to deal with the tremendous poverty that's happening in Aboriginal communities. We need to restore cuts that have been made to settlement services. So many new immigrants are among those who are facing poverty. And the massive cuts that have been made to settlement services, not only here in Durham, but across the country, are shameful. And they block new immigrants from being able to get the opportunities and access to what they need to a better life. And I'll just finish up by saying, and I know there's a lot of other issues, we need to have and support Tony Martin's bill. We need to get together as a parliament, as all parties, to step and set realistic poverty targets and hold ourselves accountable each and every year to those targets until we eradicate poverty, particularly for children. Thank you.
Next, we will hear from Chris Alexander, who is running for the Conservative Party in this riding. He is a rookie politician, but one of Canada's most accomplished foreign service officers. He has served in Moscow, Kabul, and the United Nations. As Canada's former ambassador to Afghanistan, he has seen levels of deprivation that most of us can barely imagine. Can you tell us what the Conservative Party will do to make poverty history?
Thanks very much, Carol. And thanks to all of you for being here, for taking the passionate interest that you do in these issues. It's an issue I'm passionate about. I spent 6 years in Afghanistan, which started out in 2000, 2001 as one of the poorest countries in the world, at or next to the bottom of global human development indices. Today, it's 16 from the bottom. Today, thanks to the impact of programs led by countries like Canada, under liberal governments and conservative governments, poverty is by no means history in that country, and here we're talking about poverty on the levels of $2 a day per person. That's the poverty level, as defined by the World Bank and others in countries like Afghanistan. But people are being lifted out of poverty. Why? Because they've regained their link to the international community, because they're starting to trade and invest and develop economic opportunities themselves, and because Afghanistan, after 30 years of war, and even amid continuing conflict, is starting to restore its economic life. And Carol, the message that we have on this Conservative team and that I have for you as a candidate in this riding, and for Dennis and Laurel and Mike, is very much that the economy, growing, a Canadian economy, one of the most successful in the world, is the main solution to eliminating poverty in this country. It can be eliminated. We've seen the numbers. We only started collecting them in 1976, but in the 1930s, when we had a huge economic crisis, in the Second World War, deeply intertwined with the history of this town, and in decades since then, there have been crises that made poverty absolutely a plague on the face of this land. But in recent years, as Mark mentioned, we've gone from 1996, 15.2% below the poverty level, to 2007, 9.2%, our highest level of achievement in the fight against poverty under this government, and only back up to 9.4% today. Why? Well, because we had a global financial crisis, ladies and gentlemen. We had the worst loss of jobs, loss of trade, loss of momentum in the global economy and the Canadian economy that we've experienced since the Second World War. But thanks to wise policies on taxes, on developing human resources, teaching people skills, integrating immigrants, providing social housing to Native peoples, to First Nations across this country, we have succeeded in coming out of that great global crisis with probably the best record on poverty fighting of any developed country. 500,000 jobs created since the peak of that recession, even while the United States continues to be mired in poverty and job losses beyond anything that we've seen in our lifetime. So my message to you is that the policies of Stephen Harper's government, the policies of reducing taxes, strengthening an economy, and investing in people, above all, the education, the health, and the skills that will make our people able to participate fully in society, has been the key to success in the past for this country, and will continue to be in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And our third speaker, just got to get to my introduction, is Trish McCullough, who is running for the New Democratic Party in Whitby, Oshawa, the riding just east of here. She worked at General Motors for 26 years and was downsized a couple of times. After helping many families as a union representative, she took early retirement in 2008. She is, pardon me, now working in her community and furthering her education. Can you tell us what the NDP will do to make poverty history?
Thank you, Carol. Do I need this? Yes. Okay. Good afternoon, all of you, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for making this a very passionate issue for you to be engaged in here today. Like you and your community, you care. Like myself, I want to share the real stories of this community and what we're under right now as far as economic crisis. Families here are waiting in 4,000 number for affordable housing. There are 14,000 people lined up at food banks today in our community. Not what is our party doing, but what have we done? But what am I doing along with our party and our community? Aside from attending local municipal councils, talking with folks in our community about the 70 people that are being displaced in our town because their homes are being uplifted for the Ontario Places to Grow. 70 people who live in a community that are warmed by their neighbors are their family, are ripped apart today. I don't see politicians and photo ops happening today on their land, and that's a shame. I stand beside them in support because I know the NDP has a national housing strategy, but there is no political will today to address this. And why? Why is that? Homelessness and poverty are not bringing the votes. Maybe the 407 is. That seems to be front page news today. And I feel very saddened by that. So that's why I expressed to you today, for being here means so much to me. The numbers here are great, and that the online people have taken their time, they're queued up in waiting lists to be in this discussion. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Because I stand here with the greatest respect of Jack Layton and the MPs in the House today that have worked to draft legislation, that have studied for 3 years along with Tony Martin the impact of poverty in our society, our communities, and there's no way out for these folks unless we give them that hope. The hope that Harper dismissed with a wave of a hand just only a week ago. Shame. But the NDP continues to struggle in this battle, even through a parole government. Tony Harper moved on, stick-handling the study, organizing 63 community groups, along with 260 witnesses, coming forward to share their stories, unheard of in history. We know the way. The NDP has legislation. We have the bills in place. The petition is here for you to engage, to share with your neighbors, your friends. As Carol has said, I've lived through downsizing. I have had experience in poverty as a young student struggling for a first job. These are differences that I want to make when I am elected as MP in Whitby, Oshawa, to take this on and talk to the constituents, to continue the roundtable forums that we've had, 3 already today, and many more to come. Please join me. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Rebecca Harrison, who is running for the Green Party in Whitby, Oshawa. She was instrumental in developing her party's poverty elimination program. It reflects her experience as a social justice advocate and champion of Canada without poverty. Can you tell us what the Green Party will do to make poverty history?
Thank you, Carol, and thank you to the organizers and all of you that are here attending today. As we all know, during a time of economic recession, it's those of lower incomes that are disproportionately affected. That's why now, more than ever, the federal government needs to invest in a long-term plan to help eliminate poverty from Canada once and for all. 7 provinces across this country have already taken on the commitment to reduce poverty. But as Dennis said, every single one of those plans hinges on the support of the federal government that we know is so far lacking. The Green Party of Canada believes the solution starts with a federally driven poverty elimination plan. And as a first step to this program, we're going to create a commissioner of poverty elimination. This will ensure that poverty elimination is a top priority for successive governments from here on out, regardless of what the governing party stripe is. The commissioner would also ensure that the federal strategy would be responsive to the changing aspects of poverty in Canada and ensure the process is completely transparent and the government is accountable for the results. We feel that this is going to engage Canadians in the solution that we can take on together. This plan includes, but is not limited to, a national affordable housing plan with an annual rate of building, which means the supply of housing is no longer going to be an issue by 2019. The Green Party would extend the length of EI benefits as well as change eligibility so that no longer are the majority of Canadians ineligible to receive their benefits. We would restore and revamp the 2005 agreement reached between the federal government, provinces and territories to help achieve a universal access childcare program in Canada. We would increase the guaranteed income supplement for seniors by 25% and explore expansion of CPP to ensure that Canadian seniors are no longer living below the poverty line in their retirement. We would support long-term stable funding for those with disabilities through a guaranteed livable income that is not subject to clawbacks. And we would immediately embark on a commission to study the feasibility of establishing, in cooperation with provinces, a national pharmacare program that ensures effective pharmaceuticals are available to Canadians who need them. So no longer do Canadians have to decide whether they're going to buy their medication one week or they're going to eat. And finally, the Green Party of Canada would augment the government's measurement of progress, or gross domestic product, with a genuine progress indicator that annually measures how well we're doing based on quality of life indicators such as poverty elimination, so that no longer can any government ignore the level of poverty in this country by solely focusing on economic growth alone.
Hear, hear.
The Green Party of Canada and I myself think the cost of poverty, both human and financial, is something that we can absolutely not afford to ignore any longer. We are willing to work with all parties and truly all Canadians to guarantee a poverty-free Canada. Thank you.
We have now heard from all 4 political representatives. If you have not already written your question, please do it now and try to use the sheet that looks like this one I am holding in my hand. If anyone needs help drafting their question, please raise your hand and a member of the organizing team will be happy to do that. And when you finish drafting your question, please signal to Mondana, who is over there right now, but she will be working her way around the room, and she will pick it up and bring it to the front. And in the meantime, I will ask a warm-up question to each of our political candidates, and I'll start with Mark Cullen. Your party went into the 28 election campaign with a very ambitious anti-poverty plan. You pledged to cut the poverty rate by 30% in 5 years, and the child poverty rate by 50%. And you explained exactly how you intended to reach those goals. I'm not hearing anything nearly as comprehensive this time. Why has the Liberal Party lowered its sights?
Well, thank you. I think it's fair to say we haven't lowered our sights. We haven't had a campaign. And when we have a campaign, we're going to present a platform that I think where you'll see the same kind of very ambitious strategy to combat poverty. It was deeply disappointing to me in the last campaign that there wasn't a great deal of debate about poverty. And I was deeply proud of the fact that we as a party had put forward a strategy, as you quite rightfully said, Carol, to reduce poverty by 30% overall, but 50% for children in particular. And let me just speak briefly to why it matters. It matters not just because we care about those people who are trapped in poverty. It matters because if those people can't get out of poverty, if they can't, and by the way, it's not enough to have a good economy, folks. You have to give people opportunity. They have to be able to get an education. People have to be able to have child care. The elderly certainly are in a position where a strong economy is going to change their fixed income. So these things, people are trapped in poverty. We have to give them the doors to get out. And if we don't, this manifests itself in crime. And you know, when we talk about, and there was just a minister here in Ajax the other day who said the best prevention strategy is jails. Folks, the best prevention strategy is making sure that people are given hope and opportunity, is making sure that people are not trapped in poverty, restoring the more than 70% that has been cut from the crime prevention budget. We have to go at the root causes, at the things that cause people to go off the rails and remove hope from their lives. When we restore those, we not only lift people out of poverty, we reduce crime, we make our communities more healthy, and by the way, those become tax-paying citizens who end up giving us more tax revenues to do good things with in this country.
Here, here.
And next I'm going to ask Chris Alexander. The party you hope to represent in the House of Commons has repeatedly rejected policies for which many people in this group have worked very hard for a long time. A national housing strategy, an increase in the child tax benefit, a basic income for Canadians who are too disabled to work, and support for provinces with their anti-poverty initiative. Does your party have a better plan than all of those?
Thanks, Carol. We have a plan that is working for Canada's economy and working to lift people out of poverty. And it isn't just about growing the economy and creating jobs. It is about creating opportunity, which is why this government, in only its last budget in 2010, put forward the following measures. $2 billion for the economy of tomorrow, for innovation. $2.2 billion for communities and infrastructure. $1.6 billion for the employment insurance program, an unprecedented investment. $1 billion for new skills and training. And above and beyond that, Carol, as you know, I think very well, this government has supported social transfers to the provinces on a scale beyond what we have seen again in our lifetime. The Liberals, under Paul Martin, while Mark Holland was an MP, absolutely retrenched when it came to transfers to the provinces. Many of the problems we're still struggling with in our hospitals, in our school systems, across this country, still date from those days. We haven't caught up fully. But under Stephen Harper, there has been more funding for those social programs than we have ever seen before. And as for social housing and children, I don't think there's any government in the history of Canada, through social transfers to the provinces and through its own programs, that has done more for social housing, built more units of social housing. There are 12,000 projects that have been funded since 2006 in this area, including for Aboriginal Canadians.
Thank you very much. And now a question for Trish McAuliffe, who, as I said, is running for the NDP next door. I don't know of any MP in the House of Commons who has put forward as many private members' bills or committee recommendations to reduce poverty as Tony Martin of your party. But almost none of his efforts have resulted in tangible gains for people living in poverty. What can the NDP do to build support among parliamentarians and among Canadians?
Well, thank you, Carol. The answer is quite simply, we know there has to be political will. The NDP has always been a fabulous opposition party, opposition party that needs to grow, in fact, to make a difference. And that's why I have stepped to the plate myself to work with Tony Martin, who I've met in the region of Oshawa just very recently as he was releasing his his petition on poverty elimination, not reduction, elimination. As a strong advocate that Tony Martin is, we do share a same passion of our roots in the community, and that's where we go to make our connections with people, is to build through the grassroots. May it be problems that exist for people in their community, may it be issues that need to come to the forefront that aren't politically savvy, that aren't, sweet to nature, but important and critical, especially today in the crisis that we endured. It was Jack Layton that came to the community. No other federal advocate came to the CW Action Center, where workers were faced with plant closures never before imaginable. It was Jack Layton and I who sat at a round table that we put together in a very short period of time to talk about what measures are needed and what is happening, to hear from the lives of frontline workers and members of our community on what needs to be done. This is how bills and policies are put forward, because we're on the street, we're in your living rooms, we visit homes. Jack has been to resident communities of long-term housing and sees the critical need. It's talking to people one-on-one, and this is what the NDP does best. But the political will has to come from parliamentarians. And we know through the bills that have been presented, there is support. Many of them have passed unanimously, like Ed Broadbent's bill 20 years ago, the 20th anniversary of this study being released, marks the difference that we can make. But it's political will, Carol, of the government of today. So let's increase those numbers of MPs in the House of Commons to represent the NDP party. That will make a difference.
Hear, hear.
One quick last question from me, and then it's your turn. Ms. Harrison, your party has called for a legislated end to poverty, guaranteed livable income for all Canadians, national affordable housing plan, 25% increase in the pension supplement for low-income seniors, and I believe free transit passes for people living on social assistance. How does the Green Party expect to achieve all of this?
Thank you very much. It's one of my favorite questions. Usually it comes along with how are you going to afford all of this? And it comes from really addressing the problem and getting all parties on side. We have to decide what our conversation is going to be. Is it going to be, can we afford this, or is this the federal government's responsibility? For years as a social justice advocate, I've heard that we can't afford this. When I see corporate tax cuts coming along that are going to end up costing us $13.7 billion annually by 2012 in lost revenue, I know that that's not the conversation. So we have a conversation of, is this the responsibility? Yes, absolutely. Ontario Association of Food Banks, in a 2009 report based on 2008 numbers, the cost of poverty for the federal government in loss of productivity, increased social costs, was $30 billion. We do not have the money to continue ignoring this problem. The Green Party of Canada will roll back corporate tax rates to 2007, which maintains that we will still be competitive on the world market. I watched Jason McDonald from Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives on Power and Politics, and he says it seems like we've won the race to the bottom, but what's the prize? Bigger deficits. And that is not a Canada that I would like to see. In fact, corporate tax cuts are the weakest option for growth, with 20 cents growth from every dollar of tax cut. Instead, we want to see infrastructure. Infrastructure has $1.50 growth for every dollar spent, and social spending is $1.44. We're going to do this by eliminating perverse subsidies to industries that have been experiencing surpluses throughout this recession. In the recession in the early 90s, corporate sector did have a considerable amount of debt. It's not true this time. The corporate sector has been experiencing surpluses, and it's the Canadian people that are suffering. We believe that the best way to stimulate a country is to stimulate and help the people, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
you, everybody. We obviously have a whole armload of questions here, so it would be a courtesy to the audience if the panelists could try to keep their answers as brief as possible. We're not going to do the timekeeper thing because some questions obviously need a little bit more time to answer than others, but we will ask them to do their best. Okay, this question is from Jeff Sear. He is Executive Director of the National Association of Friendship Centers, and he lives in Ottawa. He would like this question to go to Mark Holland, please. Over 60% of all Aboriginal people in Ontario live in urban settings. Poverty is a major issue and crosses the spectrum of components, that is childcare, working poor, education. How would your party work with existing infrastructure to address the seriously high rates of Aboriginal poverty in cities?
Well, thank you for that question. It is a national shame. If anybody has had the opportunity to visit a reserve and to see the conditions there, it is something that we should be deeply ashamed of as a society. And that's a statement, by the way, a condemnation of all political parties in government. We haven't done enough. I was proud in 2005 to be part of a government that worked with First Nations across the country to come up with the Kelowna Accord. The Kelowna Accord was not the end solution, but it was an extremely important step forward for First Nations communities to lift them out of poverty. To understand how bad the situation is, I visited every federal prison in the country. And when you see that in women's prisons, Aboriginal women make up about 25% of those that are there. Unfortunately, in the male population, it's around 14–15%. They're coming out of conditions where they were dealing with residential school abuse, dealing with tremendous poverty, substance abuse that comes from terrible government policies in the past. We have to recognize collectively our responsibility for decisions that were made that put them in that situation. And folks, it's about choices. This government has run up the biggest deficit in Canadian history. They now want to spend $30 billion on jets. These are fifth generation, first strike stealth firefighters. They want to spend more than $10 billion on corporate tax cuts that would only benefit the richest and most wealthy corporations. Small and medium-sized businesses are actually getting a tax increase because they're going to be dealing with a payroll tax increase. They want to spend tens of billions of dollars on prisons, and yet they're slashing money from prevention. And despite having spent a record amount on stimulus, we don't see any money practically being spent on things like housing or being spent particularly on dealing with some of these issues that are facing First Nations communities. We need to go back to accords like Kelowna. We need to engage them, even if there isn't votes to do it, because it's morally the right thing to do, and fundamentally we can't allow this situation to continue.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Mary Scott, and she lives in Winnipeg. She belongs to the National Council of Women of Canada. And as you can see, this one is green. The green ones are the ones that come from our online participants. And she would like to know from both Mark Holland and Chris Alexander whether either of your parties have any plans to implement a guaranteed annual income. She reminds you that Manitoba once had such a plan and it was very successful. And why don't we start with you, Chris?
All right. I think the answer to that is that there isn't any plan or policy on offer that would probably meet her wish. But watch this budget that is coming next week. Look carefully at what this government has done in recent years. The personal amount for federal income tax, to which we're all entitled without paying any taxes, it is at its highest level in Canadian history. It's $10,000, $527. We have put forward a universal child care benefit, providing all parents with $100 per month, $1,200 per year. That wasn't there before, to address the child care challenge that we know is urgent in this country, that we know is essential to permit working Canadians, especially those who are single parents, to meet the challenges of both their families and their employment. We've also seen a child tax credit given to parents, indexed, $2,000 for each child. We've seen the pension income credit doubled. We've seen pension income splitting introduced in 2007. And we've seen a whole range of efforts under the tax system in order to protect those with the lowest income and to protect consumers as they go about making their basic purchases. And if anyone in this room thinks that the GST, much as it has the fingerprints of both parties all over it in its genesis, is not one of the most regressive taxes we have, looming up and taking money, literally, out of the pockets of our most vulnerable Canadians, even when we try to forgive them income tax, from paying income tax completely, still requiring them to pay a premium, a surtax, on the basic necessities of life. Well, the Harper government has reduced that GST. And that is an anti-poverty measure. Not one that represents a magic wand, not one that eliminates the pain or eliminates poverty. But it's one of those strategies that a government like this can point to as having reduced the burden on Canadians, equipped more Canadians through skills training to rejoin the job market, and equipped businesses. And here, Mark, I have to disagree with you. Businesses will not be facing higher taxes this year. They'll be facing lower taxes. And lower taxes don't mean benefits for people on Bay Street. Above all in this country, they mean a burden off the shoulders of small businesses, the retailers in Ajax and Pickering, the small manufacturers in Durham, who are the engine of growth and the engine of employment in this country. If we didn't have them, and if we didn't have the tax framework that has kept them afloat through the world's greatest downturn since World War II, believe me, we would not have created 500,000 jobs, and all of the jobs, and all of the vibrancy that represents for Durham and for Canada in these last 2 years, as the rest of the world, including the most developed countries in the world, have struggled and stagnated.
Thank you. I'm going to read 2 questions right now. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, of course.
I apologize. The question had to do with a guaranteed annual income. And what I'm going to say is that we need to ensure that every person, I'll come at it in reverse because I don't believe in a guaranteed annual income, but what I do believe is that every single person in the country should have the opportunity to have access to education. Every single person in the country should not be in a situation where they don't have housing, food. We shouldn't have people in the country who don't have access to opportunity. Because what I see as public safety and national security critic across the country is that when you remove hope, when you put doors that are in front of people that they can't walk through, fundamentally that leads to very bad places. But let me just speak for a second about the idea that the GST cut is somehow an action against poverty. Folks, when you are a new immigrant who's just had your settlement funding cut, and you're paying rent and you're buying groceries, you do not pay GST on rent, you do not pay GST on groceries, you just save nothing, absolutely nothing. When you're a single mother, struggling to get by, trying to find a way how you're going to afford childcare, to be able to put your child into a place so you can go and get a better education, get a better job, that GST cut isn't going to do you anything, because similarly, almost all of your money is going to rent and is going to pay for groceries. So fundamentally, if we're going to fix these things, it's not enough to just, fix the top and hope the biggest companies make really big profits. It doesn't work, folks. And the idea that small and medium-sized businesses are getting this corporate tax cut, it's dead wrong. Only the largest companies will. Small and medium-sized businesses are seeing their payroll taxes increase, period. That's all they're getting. And if we want to make the right moves, then fundamentally we've got to ask what are the right strategies to impose. And if we're going to be reducing the deficit, and remember, we have the largest one in our history. The Parliamentary Budget Officer now says it's a permanent structural deficit. if you now begin to cut. After all of this historic spending, the government's put no money into any of these priorities. And then you're now going to start cutting to eliminate this deficit. Where do you think they're going to cut, folks? Where is the axe going to come?
Taxpayers.
And it's going to come in the form of going after the very things that we need to fix issues like this. So we need honest conversations.
Thanks very much, Mark. Okay, I am going to read a couple of questions because they're quite similar this time. And I'm going to ask all candidates to address them briefly, starting with you, Rebecca. This one is from Ron Dancy. He is from Oshawa. There was a national child care plan in 2006. And then he runs through the circumstances of how it fell apart. A national child care program, cost shared with the provinces, would cost, according to him, $5 billion. 14-month-old Doyen Noyen died at the hands of an unlicensed babysitter in Mississauga. Why can't our government have a program so this baby did not have to die? And the second and very similar question, Canada is a very wealthy country, but stingy when it comes to young children, and nowhere is this more true than in early childhood education and childcare. Canada has no national childcare program, but relies on individuals, community organizations, entrepreneurs, and nonprofit organizations to develop services. Well, this is quite a long question, and I'll just shorten it up. Lack of access to child care leaves parents, especially single women, struggling to balance work, family life, and quality of life concerns. How will your party address this question? Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. If you don't see it already, the little girl that they mentioned that passed away, her picture is just up right over there. A national child care plan is an absolute necessity. Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives also proposed a $10 a day child care plan and its alternative budget, which uses real-time numbers, just like the real federal budget would. I encourage you to look at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives website and research that. There was also a mother in Scarborough, and this was a couple years ago, 5 years ago. It was either she worked or she lost the home that her and her child had in Scarborough. And I remember this because I remember thinking to myself how hard it must have been for her to make this decision. She duct taped her 5-year-old child in a chair in the kitchen while she went to work. The most atrocious thing that I've heard probably in the last few months from the current government is when Diane Finlay said it's their policy not to let other people take care of their children. This is not a question of, geez, will I stay home and raise my kids or will I give them to somebody else? To make it such a menial argument for these mothers, these single mothers who are struggling, that's their decision? Clearly, they don't have a decision. And a national child care plan, it will give them that ability. I have a friend who's a nurse. She couldn't go back to work full-time as a registered nurse because of how expensive her daycare for my godson would be. This is a crisis in Canada, and we need to invest in it. Investments in national child care is a generational investment to help our most precious resource. Comparatively, a corporate tax cut is a generational burden that will increase costs down the line for the same children that a national child care plan would protect. Thank you.
Shame.
Thank you. This is, of course, a very near and dear topic to my heart. A generation that has come through the boomers and understanding the growth today and young people starting families and starting their careers. with not even a thought of what's going to happen when they need childcare, because it's unimaginable. We know the burden that's existing on families today relying on grandparents to do the babysitting. And that's unimaginable in my lifetime. I was fortunate enough to have a child care program within my workplace that supported the employees and a flexible shift that allowed people to bring their children affordably to a facility to accommodate parents on the job. That is worth investigating and investing in, not corporate tax cuts. When our party talks about child care, make no mistake, our target is, in fact, the economic burden of the generation to come before us on the fighter jets and the corporate tax cuts today. That's in our discussions, absolutely. Children, the future of children and investments, just of $1 in child care, supports education, future education possibilities for children, a healthier lifestyle for children, social interaction and participation of children in our community is important to the NDP. And again, presenting bills and opportunities to discuss with people how to make the system work. Yes, affordably, because it can be done in partnerships, strategically working with provincial levels of government, municipal levels of government, but also in corporate partnership. Imagine that. So these are the directions for the future. We can only look to the YWCA report called Educated, Employed, and Equal, an economic prosperity case for national child care. That's what this generation is hinged on, for the support for the young people today entering a career path. We need to do this for them, and we have the way, we have the political will as a party to make it happen. But we have to call on those to make those investments, not in fighter jets and not in corporate tax cuts.
Hear, hear.
Well, every time a baby dies because of neglect, or because of the absence of a policy, or because of some oversight of our communities, some failing of our communities, we all have to hang our heads, and we all have to resolve to do better. These are tragedies that are unacceptable in our community. They're also crimes, in some cases, and they need to be addressed. They need to be at the center of discussions like today's, and they need to be part of a strategy addressing law and order, addressing families, addressing the economy, and yes, addressing poverty, that brings us closer together and makes us stronger as a society. Now, anyone who thinks, though, that poverty reduction or poverty elimination, and I believe in poverty elimination for this country, we've eliminated for the levels the World Bank recognizes. We don't have that kind of poverty in Canada, but we still have low income. $2 a day? $2 a day. I would ask anyone in this room to stand up and tell me who's living on $2 a day.
I can show you people who are...
I'm living on less.
It's the purchasing power you have to look at, not the money.
I'm a mother of 8, and you guys took my unemployment away from me because I got fired. Do you call that fair? And I have 8 children to feed. And 3 grandchildren. Do you care? No. Because when I went to Mark Holland's office, where was he? He laughed at me. Oh, we can't touch this. So how's that fair? To not feed a family of 8.
Off my special diet, buddy.
What special? Oh yeah, I have to go on a special diet to feed my kid. You guys only don't even cover my rent. How's that fair? And I had to go to welfare and degrade myself, and I'm a hard-working mother. You guys are such liars. You say you're there for people, you're not. You guys degrade us and make us feel disgraced. And that is
tax
wrong.
cuts for corporations.
That's wrong, to disgrace single mothers who are trying to work hard to provide for their family. And because they got fired, they can't receive unemployment? Oh, legislation. Let's talk about legislation. Where's the legislation helping us? Tell me. And I'm sure it's more mothers than me. There's a lot of mothers like me. And they're probably in a worse situation. Some of them commit suicide, you know. Some of them have heart attacks on the floor. But I didn't. I was strong enough to fight. And you guys still said no to me, even though I fought. So tell me where the fairness is. Tell me.
If tragedy strikes your family, and God forbid, because I would never even wish it on someone like you, that your children die, and nor your wife, in a car accident, or they get murdered by some psycho, you know what? What's going to happen to you? Are you going to stand there and be able to act how you do? I doubt it. Don't even answer the question, because you know what? You could lose everything and end up on the street sleeping. Don't bother to answer.
My husband and I are both disabled, yet they fail to recognize the fact that I am disabled. I have lost $151 off my special diet money, and I can't even get reapplied to get onto the new special diet. You tell me what a fairness is in that.
Listen, I understand the sincerity of all these comments and the emotion that lies behind them.
Please answer.
I would ask you, please,
Answer.
to give our panelist the courtesy of a chance to answer.
Here, here.
I'd like him to answer, actually. Please answer, Chris.
Now, where's the answer to my question, too?
Thank you. And we have a lot of questions to get through here. But if tragedy struck my family, and all of our families have had tragedy.
Your family. I'm talking about you.
I'm talking about my family too.
You.
I hope that you would stand with me, and my community would stand with me the way I am standing with you today for this discussion.
But I'm a better human being than you. I could never do your job.
That is not true.
How are you standing with us?
We're here for a discussion on poverty.
Okay, this is
I just started
reality.
I just started saying that I believe in the elimination of poverty in this country. And I think that this country has done great things for its population on the strength of its communities to reduce the level of poverty. But we have to do a lot more. And your story, I'd like to hear it in detail. I can't vouch for what happened in the MP's office, but I'd love to hear what prevented you from having access to the programs that are there to ensure.
Legislation.
We probably need more legislation. And legislation will flow, and legislation will meet the challenges of today in a parliament down the road
But it doesn't
that
feed
is stronger than the
it
one we
doesn't
have.
feed 8
I'll just
children.
finish answering the question that
It
we were
doesn't
asked
feed
about.
8
all right?
children.
And I thank you for...
He will be around
I
afterwards
will.
for personal conversation.
And I thank you for your passion and for telling your stories. But let me just finish on this question of a national child care plan. Since 2006, since this government came into office, a child tax credit has been put in place, a national child benefit that is stronger than anything that went before, and universal child care benefit has been in place that I've already mentioned. These are all tools that families and parents and guardians of children can use to look after those children, and I would argue have a better chance of looking after them more successfully than they did in the period before 2007. But it's not enough. And I think we do need to think strategically. I wouldn't be in favor of a federal government ramming a national strategy down everyone's throat. There are many stakeholders on this issue. Education and health are provincial responsibilities. Civil society, NGOs, many of the groups that have sponsored today's discussion are among the best positioned to have an impact on the well-being of children and on the policies that affect children across this country, and they're not all going to be delivered by governments. The strength of our country in raising children, in making them successful members of society, in equipping them to join the workforce, is in its families, its communities, yes, its businesses, and I will stand here and defend the crucial role that small businesses play in making this country a success. But it's also in our provincial and federal governments, and we need to work together on these issues.
The hardest part of my job is to hear stories like yours. And I have, every day of my life, people walk in my office. I'm deeply sorry for the situation you're in. You may not believe it, but I can relate. When I was 19 years old, 20 years old, we had a baby. I was full-time in university. I was trying to work a couple of jobs. I didn't know how I was going to pay for groceries. We lived on a grocery budget of about $20 a week. I know what poverty is. I lived it. I know how hard it is. I know what it takes to pull yourself out of it. And I know what it makes, a difference it makes if there's somebody there for you or if there's somebody who's not. I had children very young. I didn't have a strong support network because there's a lot of judgment associated with that. So I know exactly how hard it is. Now, I don't recall having met, but I can tell you that if you came into my office, I can't always fix everything, but I always will do my best to help in any way I can. And I'm more than happy to talk to you after this and to see what exactly the situation is. And in any way I can help you, I will help you. I know how hard it is, and I ask you to hang in there, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you after this. Let me say that on a broader level, in terms of early childhood development, I can't tell you how important this is. And it took too long. 2005, it should have happened sooner. I wish it had happened sooner. But finally, in 2005, we got an agreement signed with every single province to bring a strategy in place across the country to have a national child care plan. It's something we desperately need in this country. The first 3 years of life are the most formative in a child's life. We're far behind all the other nations, compared whether or not it's Europe or other jurisdictions, in how we deal with early childhood development. It's not just an issue of fairness, it's an issue of competitiveness. What's been shown is if you don't have the right type of early childhood development in those first 3 years, that you're not going to have the opportunities later in life to get good education. You're already starting behind in junior kindergarten and senior kindergarten. That those kids who didn't have that support in those early years fall behind. Unfortunately, right now, that national strategy was axed, and it was replaced with a $100 a month check. The problem with that $100 a month check is that it's the same check going to a family who has nothing, who's scraping and pulling to get by to make ends meet. They get the same $100 as a family making $300,000 or $400,000 a year. And I'll tell you, when I was in that spot, in those dark days in my life, I needed the help then. I didn't need the check now. I needed it then. So I understand from personal experience, from having lived it, exactly how important these types of policies are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I did not mean to marginalize or silence people who have legitimate and genuine concerns that they came here to express. It's just that if anyone monopolizes the time of the panel, other people lose out. And each of the panelists, I believe, is prepared to stay afterward to have those personal conversations. So please don't think there is any ill will. All right, our next question comes from Mike Connolly, and he works at the Storehouse, the food bank here in Ajax. And he asks this question to Mark Holland and Chris Alexander. Many elderly people, some nearly 80 years old, have to work at McJobs just to meet the minimum payment while waiting for rent-geared to income housing. How would you address this problem?
Thank you. Well, I think there needs to be a couple of components to this. Obviously, there's the income for folks who are on a fixed income today. There's the issues around housing. And more often than not, these are people who've worked their whole lives contributing to the economy and trying to make a difference, and now find themselves in their golden years without the means to be able to make ends meet. And clearly, we've got to do more on that. But it's not just about trying to get at the housing and get at the benefits that are there. We've also got to, frankly, talk about the elephant in the room. We need to reform the way saving is happening in this country. And if we're honest with each other in this room, we know people aren't saving enough. And that if we don't fundamentally reform that, we're going to be bankrupt as a country in the future. that the growing, swelling numbers of seniors are only going to continue to be in this situation unless we take real action and reform. That's why, and I know I don't have a lot of time today, I'd be happy to explain to anybody who's interested, we're presenting serious reform and changes of our Canada pension plan to give people the opportunity to have savings there so they have a guaranteed benefit on the other side. And I think if we're going to fix the problems of seniors today, we've got to get right the saving rates that are in behind it and make sure that people are going to have something that they can be sure is going to cover them for when they go in. We're not simply going to be able to afford it when we have, right now, 5 people working for every 1 person retired. We're going to 2 people working for every person retired. We've got to make those reforms and changes now.
Thanks, Mark. And I think the key here is to give pensioners, seniors, the breathing room they need to save and to retain the hard-won earnings that they've made, but also to give municipalities and the other engines of creation of social housing and affirmative housing the tools they need to do more. Through the gas tax, through Canada's Economic Action Plan, and all the infrastructure spending that's happened in the last 2 or 3 years, believe me, there's no time for the details, but this federal government has invested more in social housing, those 12,000 projects I mentioned, than any previous government. And it's not enough.
What a deficit.
It's not enough. But it has to be done in partnership, and I'm glad the 2 councillors are here because these are the kinds of things that need to be discussed. They have been discussed in the context of the infrastructure programs to date. They need to be discussed further in the future. And yes, there is a deficit. Not just in households and in people's bank accounts, mine certainly has one, but a structural one in Ottawa that is going to hang over subsequent generations if we're not careful. So let's look further at measures like pension income credit, doubled from $1,000 to $2,000 in the last couple of years, the age credit raised by $2,000 over 5 years, pension income splitting, which has allowed a lot of retired families to retain more earnings and send less to Ottawa. And we know that they need it. And if I get the chance, I am determined to ensure that that breathing room for seniors and pensioners grows. Just as their role as mentors, and in some cases working people, many people want to work down later, is appreciated and valued the way we know it needs to be if this society is to be as healthy as we want it to be.
Thank you very much. And our next question comes from Ed Gertson, a retired gentleman sitting right here, and he would like Rebecca Harrison to answer this question. If the federal government canceled all student debt rather than spending, he doesn't know exactly how much, on fighter jets, how would your people vote?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of student debt. My husband has a lot of student debt. And the most perverse thing about it is that I had to beg, borrow, and beg OSAP to give me that debt. They weren't going to give me that debt. My parents owned a car, so they honestly said to me, your parents better sell your car and sell their business, or we're not giving you any money. So at 17 years old, I had to move out of my parents' house, live by myself, to qualify for the debt load that I now have. And what happened is, when I got out of school, instead of taking internships and taking volunteer jobs and getting myself the experience I would need to someday get a job, I had to take the first job that came around because OSAP was on the phone and they knew where I lived. And this meant that I had to go to a food bank to eat, to pay back my OSAP loans, to pay back the bank loans that I eventually have to have when they cut me off. And I don't know how many of you know this, but in Durham Region, in our food banks here, you can go once a month. I did the Do the Math challenge, and I was shocked to find out you can go once a month to get 3 to 5 days worth of food. And this is what we're having our students do. St. Paul's on the Hill, which is a food bank here, and I see Marg right over there from St. Paul's on the Hill, thank you. You can actually go there twice a month, and that's the only place in Durham that you can go twice a month. So we're putting a disproportionate impact on people who are trying to raise up and be productive members of society. So I absolutely agree that something has to be done about the debt load experienced by students. The Green Party of Ontario was committed to changing that. We're committed to investing in our youth and taking that burden off of them. We are also We also want to make sure that everyone is eligible to go to school. So there's no more of the 17-year-olds being forced to leave their house to go to school. We also want to invest in students that don't necessarily want to go to college or university. We have a youth job corps program where they can take a year and they can work in innovative industries, get that experience to get jobs. And also the last thing that I'll talk about is the guaranteed annual income. This is my favorite policy. And it's my favorite policy, it's the favorite policy of members, senators from both Mark Holland and Chris Alexander's parties. Hugh Segal, Conservative, Art Eggleton, Liberal, work on this policy. There was like the caller from Manitoba had said, there was a study done, it was called the MinCom study. They did this with a modest amount in Manitoba, and they studied primarily the disincentive to work. If you give people money, just a little bit of money, well, they stop working. But there was a million other metrics that they did, and not until now, when Evelyn Forgenet is going through that information, are we seeing what else guaranteed annual income can get us. There was a slight disincentive to work, and then recession hit and nobody talked about it anymore. But when Evelyn went back over everything, she's seen that a lot of the people who left their jobs for that guaranteed annual income policy went back to school. You cannot get social assistance if you are on OSAP. If you don't have enough money to eat, what are you going to do? So this is why I am dedicated to going across partisan lines and saying, we need a guaranteed annual income. It's a progressive policy that Martin Luther King brought up. And we have been dealing and tossing it around and putting it on the back burners for far too long. If we have money to look at corporate tax cuts, we have money to look at investing in everyday Canadians.
Okay, our next question is from Sherry O'Mora, and if I have mispronounced that, Sherry, correct me. She's in the room somewhere. She is from Oshawa. O'Mara, okay.
The Irish.
Appropriate day.
Yes.
Why can politicians only talk about or promise strategies that deal within the time frames of election to election? Poverty cannot be looked at as only a campaign issue, photo op. Poverty is everyone's issue. Why does the bottom line always have to be money rather than people?
That's a very, very, very important question, because we're here in the time of a possible election where the government is suddenly finding lots of money to squander out and around. But I think realistically we have to know that the NDP has always been there. I mean, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of our own leader here in the community, Ed Broadbent, tackling the issue of poverty eradication. It has always been on our agenda. Is there money here today? Not so much. We know what we're up against when we're calling on votes, right? Make no mistake about it. Some of these top primary issues are issues that reflect the vote people that actually go to the polls. We need to talk amongst ourselves. Today it's the middle class who have been impacted by the crisis today. Myself, having lost my job 3 times in a major industry in Canada. 3 times, 3 recessions. I know where investment is important in manufacturing. Is that on the discussion today? No. We have a government that wants to put manufacturing to other countries because, quote, nobody wants those jobs. So we really have to look at where those politicians are coming from in terms of who they're attracting as voters. That's the people problem.
The people problem is that the marginalized don't vote. The homeless, children can't vote, seniors who are frail. I mean, there's a whole...
Absolutely. People have lost hope in our government. I'm standing up with a party that values people. That's why I'm running with the NDP. Do I run to win? Maybe not. But what I run to is to give voices to people who are marginalized.
Hear, hear.
I go into the communities, knocking on doors. They say, no one's ever been in this area before. Why are you here? Because I care. The NDP cares. This government today has produced 33 bills and a very dysfunctional government environment with 2 prorogues that have happened, and we continue to march on this agenda, on poverty, for years, for decades where there has been money, we've been there. Supporting the National Child Care Program has always been on the agenda. Today, our campaign on CPP is finally getting some notice. So it is about people, absolutely. And thank you for bringing that, because it is our #1 priority. And we hope that we can engage people to get to the polls. That will make a difference.
Everybody matters.
Everyone matters. Every single person matters.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to rush things along. As you can see, I have enough questions here for about the next hour and a half. I'm not going to be able to get to them all. What I am going to be able to do, though, is hang on to them, pass them to the organizers, and they will take responsibility for making sure that every candidate to whom a question is addressed does see it and does have an opportunity to answer. And so here is the last question we're going to be able to fit in. It is from Mike Creek of Voices from the Street in Toronto. He would like Chris Alexander to answer this question. The government's decision on cancelling the long-form census will have a huge impact on marginalized communities and the determination of who's in poverty. Will your party reverse this decision? And he also asks where other parties stand on this issue. I'm afraid we won't have time for part 2, but I will ask Chris to answer part 1.
Thank you. And no, we won't reverse it. And you all understand that. But let's also get the question right. Because the long-form census is not being cancelled and eliminated. It is simply being made voluntary. The way most of our census data has been generated up until now. And there is not, yes, there was a disagreement with some inside Statistics Canada, and there will continue to be debate in this country about how to gather information about poverty, about First Nations, about all kinds of challenges that we face. But in this information-rich world in which we live, in which banks, Facebook, social media, all kinds of organizations are gathering more information than we've ever seen before, there actually is good news in that, in principle, working together on the basis of the best international strategies, we can probably come to a more refined, detailed, nuanced, textured understanding of the challenge we face in Canada than we ever have before. And let's work together on it. Let's work together to find who really are the vulnerable groups, who really need which kind of help, who needs education, who needs the money now because they really don't have any options, who needs more help with childcare, who needs an investment in social housing where it hasn't gone yet. That's the kind of debate we need in this country. And with the long-form census, the short-form census, voluntary or not, we're going to get to the bottom of these questions. As this government, and as provincial governments, and as social community organizations, which I know all of you represent, it's far too important for any of us to give up because of the evolving nature of one particular tool. And this candidate for office is not going to give up. This government and this party that I represent is not going to give up. We've made a huge amount of progress in improving the prosperity of this country, spreading it around, relieving those most in need. Yes, by creating jobs and by making a tax framework conducive to the creation of jobs, but we need to do more. And I'm deeply grateful to all of you for the opportunity to be here today. And it's not just in election time. There is no election at the moment. I think we're
as far as I know. As of this morning.
And this is the first time I've ever been invited to a poverty forum in Ajax, and it certainly won't be the last time I come. I spent 6 years working on these issues in Afghanistan. I saw communities literally go from indigence to not thriving, but to a sustainable livelihood. It can be done in all parts of the world. Of course it can be done on an exemplary basis in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And in case there was something one of our panelists desperately wanted to say but didn't get a chance to, we're going to give them 1 minute apiece for a closing statement, and in this case, our timekeeper is going to be absolutely rigorous.
Well, first of all, thank you to everybody for attending. I think it's an extremely important forum. I'll end by going to a point that Carol made, which is that, in the last election, we did have, I think, a very strong platform dealing with these issues. And I think I've increasingly come to the conclusion that we won't get elected on. And that doesn't matter. I think politics is about doing the right thing whether or not you're going to get votes for it or not. And this is an issue, as you're a member of Parliament, that I fight from now until an election, or hopefully thereafter, that I'll fight with every ounce of my energy on. It's something for which I have a deep personal passion. Let me just say this as well. We have to understand that dollar amounts can be very confusing. I was in Laos, where the average family income was $100. I went through tribal villages where they lived on sticky rice. They were some of the happiest kids you ever want to see, because their situation is fundamentally different. They're not part of the market economy. But I can tell you that every single day in my office, I see people right here in our community, in Ajax Pickering, who are hurting, who are suffering, who are being hit by the economy and who need help. These are good people who want to work and want to do the best they can. And we need to be there for them. Thank you.
Well, a great economist, Amartya Sen from India, well known in Canada, active in the World Bank, defined poverty as pronounced deprivation in well-being. And that's what it is. It doesn't necessarily have to do with dollars and cents, taxes, money in your pocket. It is that sense of exclusion from society. It is that sense of marginalization. And we, in this country, have the tools to be able to overcome those pathologies, those weaknesses in the society in almost every case. But we need to absolutely work together. And I submit to you again that our poverty reduction strategy, our poverty elimination strategy, is bound up with the economic success of this country, with the success not just of businesses and those who create jobs, but with the schools, the clinics, the hospitals that equip Canadians to be part of that economy and think not just of themselves and of the most successful members of the community, but think outside of their boundaries at people on the other side of the street who've lost their jobs, who don't have enough to eat, who've experienced a family tragedy. That's what fighting poverty is about. And this government will continue to make it one of its top priorities.
Chris, you just described privation. You didn't describe poverty. Privation is the lack of food, shelter, and clothing. Poverty is the lack of knowledge, skills, and tools with which to make a living within a community. That's poverty. Privation is not enough food, shelter, and clothing. That's your definition. And that's why we're not solving the problem, because we haven't got the solution collected. We haven't got the definition right.
Thank you. I think we have our next MP in line for the next election. There's a provincial election coming up as well, so we need to talk.
Too old.
Never too old. Last November, when the Parliamentary Committee report was released, Tony Martin called it a roadmap for a just and inclusive society that needed the political will in Ottawa to act. Needless to say, we are not impressed by the dismissive hand of the Harper government that waved over these particular tools. But Martin and our party will continue to keep on the fight, to develop a national poverty elimination strategy that you can count on. The NDP are demanding a national leadership on this dire issue today. Yet the Conservatives have abandoned the fight with smoke and mirrors, hence abandoning the poor people, including Aboriginal people, persons with disabilities, single seniors, and children. Take away one's hope when that's simply all they have. Jobs will not end poverty. There are 750,000 working Canadians living in poverty today, despite their jobs. The working poor, a class that is growing insurmountably today. It's possibly our own neighbors, friends, our children, who we brought back into our homes to live with us, or children who were caring for their children as grandmothers and grandfathers. Precarious employment is no way out. The NDP has strategies that are effective, and we need to get them adopted. And this government needs to listen. What is crucial now is a plan that Ottawa leadership is legislation. That we can offer as a party because we're backed by hundreds of experts. Thank you.
When we talk about growth, let's not talk about false economies. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities estimated that there's a $123 billion deficit in backlog repairs. That's roads, bridges, water, wastewater. That doesn't include social housing, schools, and hospitals. They also estimate a $115 billion deficit for these new builds. All we're talking about right now is giving corporations a break. Corporations are not responsible for building those. Governments are. The public money is. So let's not be pushing our money away for what's going to help corporations now and saddle our children with the debt of what needs to be built now, later. If there's any question left of who is suffering and how they are suffering, this is the Human Report. That's a pretty big report. What preceded it was in from the Margins report. They articulated who is suffering. They articulated how they are suffering, and they even articulated how to solve the problem. The truth is, I'm quite frankly sick of the discussion being about money and dollars and cents, because the money is there and we've seen it and we know it. This needs to be a discussion about human rights. Poverty elimination is the biggest violation of human rights by the UN. The UN has already said that. It's old, 1992. So I propose that all parties in this room, all people in Canada stand up and make poverty a violation of human rights in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, so we never have to have this discussion again, that every government has a mandate to fix the problem for good.
All right. I would invite you to please join me in thanking our panelists for making the time to be with us today, thanking our three-city organizing team for pulling this community forum together. And at this point, our national forum ends, and this is also the conclusion of our online session. However, if you live in the Durham region, please stay in the room because I am now going to pass the microphone over to the folks at the Durham Community Council to talk about next steps in this region. And with that, I will thank you very much for allowing me to moderate your session.